Alright guys, so we're going to do a short PowerPoint over the changing role of women in the 1920s. I gave you guided notes. This goes exactly with the PowerPoint, and you're going to need it for your assignment that we're going to do right after this. It's just a short thing. So try to fill out all those blanks if you can. Alright, so one of the main causes of the changing role of women in the 1920s was their participation in the war effort during World War I. So thousands of women formed and joined organizations that worked to bring relief to war-torn countries in Europe and expand the war effort at home. So they were actually organizing, raising money, raising resources, and trying to help with the war over in Europe. And then they were eventually doing it here after we entered the war in 1917. So a huge deficit was happening because we had all these men that went to go fight in Europe at the end of the war. And those jobs that they held before that, they needed to be filled. And so women who were working, or not working, but in the home, taking care of kids, taking care of the house, stepped up and took on the jobs of men. So women saw this wartime service as a way to claim their full citizenship. They're saying, hey, I'm in my husband's job, I'm working on the farm, I'm working in the factory. If I can do this and he can do this, why do I not have the same rights as him? So I want someone to describe to me how you think women were thought of before World War I. So before all this stuff started happening. Yes.
Like housewives and
Yeah.
cleaners.
Yes.
Yeah, they really want hard workers. They want to work, so right, men get they get.
Yeah, so they didn't deserve the same rights as men.
You get more than one. If you get more right.
Yeah, I'll ask you a bunch of questions today.
Yeah.
Yes.
They didn't they weren't seen as like a high tier person.
Yeah, so it was men and then women.
Yeah, it was men before women.
Yep.
and everything.
So women start taking these jobs, they form these organizations, participate in the war, and then how people viewed them change. So what do you think? Yes.
They become much more respected.
Or respected, yes.
People view women as more capable rather than weak and
Yeah, so more capable. So men didn't think that women were capable of doing these things, and all of a sudden they are. So what now?
they start getting more jobs.
Yeah, we will get there, but yes, that's true. So, so their participation in the war, that first line, I want you to put a star by that, because that's one of our main causes for the roles, the changing roles of women. So that very first line on the very first top of your paper, put a star by that, that's our cause number one. Cause number two, the lost generation. So the lost generation was a generation of young men who lost their lives during World War I. So we had 116,516 American deaths in World War I, and most of those were what? Well, they were men. Sorry, that was a weird question, but so they were pretty much all men. I'm sure there was a few women that were killed for some odd reason, but these were men that were fighting on the battlefield. So now we have this huge deficit of men. So the ratio of men to women is evening out a little bit more. Also, something that we don't hear about a lot in history is the flu pandemic of 1918. So from 1918 to 1919, there was an influenza pandemic, and 25% of the U.S. population became sick. 675,000 Americans died during these 2 years from that flu. That's more than died in World War I. More people in the world died from the flu than died in World War I. So we have this huge wipeout during the war, and then the flu came in and then just killed a bunch more people. So with this higher ratio of women to men, it was hard to deny women basic rights. So when we had less women, more men, I mean, it's kind of easier to kind of push people away and deny them their rights when there's not as many of them. But now we're kind of evening it out, and they're saying, hey, look, we want equal rights. 19th Amendment on August 18th, 1920. So since the 1840s, women have been fighting for the right to vote. So suffrage, which is your right to vote. So they were fighting for nearly 80 years for the right to vote. But why all of a sudden now, at the end of World War I, are they allowed to vote? So their role in the war, World War I, directly contributed to their success because men are saying, hey, I guess, they're stepping up and they're taking these jobs while we were gone. So maybe we should just give them the right to vote. So that was kind of that push that women needed, that extra support, because women were campaigning for the right to vote during World War I. So while they were organizing, helping, working, they were still doing their posters and their protests, saying, we want the right to vote. So when all this came to a head, the war was over, everything started to settle down, Congress said, hey, we think it's time. So the 19th Amendment opened the door for women to be active and vocal in government. Women started running for office and participating in local governments. So true or false, when somebody told me, the women's rights movement is still in motion today.
True.
True, why?
Because recently, like wasn't it the wage gap that they tried to abolish?
Yes.
So they're successful with?
Somewhat. So we've got the wage gap, and we see some companies saying, hey, there's not gonna be a wage gap, we're owning up to it, and we're gonna close it. Is it happening everywhere? No. Women are still not making as much money as men to do the same exact jobs, yes.
Well, like with a lot of social media and ad campaigns, they're portrayed a different way.
Yeah, that's the first time someone said that today. So, when we look in the media and we see ads for something, even though we have all shapes and colors and sizes of women, we see the same kind of woman, basically, advertising products and things like that. So stereotyping of women and things like that. Yeah, that's true. So we, I would definitely say, like, there was in the media, I think it was in the Marines, maybe, like the highest level of Marines, women were trying to get in and it was hard for them and things like that. So there's different parts of occupations that women still have trouble getting into, yes.
Yeah, like the Navy SEALs, it wasn't up until recently that you can get into it if you're a woman.
There you go. So that's so recent, and that sounds kind of crazy, right? In this day and age, women should be able to do everything, but yeah, like she just said, they were just able to join parts of the Navy SEALs, right? Okay, so I just want you to take a minute to read over this. We're just going to talk about it just a second.
What's the last point here on that?
The last
The
blade.
next one.
Go ahead, go and read that. That was one.
Oh, there's a back, yeah.
Alright, someone let me know what this is talking about.
That women and women, not the money.
Okay, yeah, women are demanding jobs, not just money, but jobs too. Yes.
Like he said, at the bottom, it says that it's going to change a lot of people's lives and the way men and women see each other.
Yeah. So women and men are taking on new roles and they're being viewed differently. Yes. Yeah, so women want to support their families as well as men, and they want to support themselves. So women at work, gender roles evolved greatly in the 1920s. So women began to vote in these public elections, and they started to change their expectations about what their roles are in society. They no longer wanted to be identified as a housewife, or the second to a man. They wanted to get the things that they wanted for themselves. So women that were working outside of the home at this, before this time were nurses and teachers, and they were doing domestic services. So like working in other people's homes, they were doing light manufacturing here and there. But after World War I, women started to take on even more difficult jobs, jobs that no one thought they could ever do. Like running telegraph lines, hauling freight, flying airplanes, and practicing stenography. And stenography is basically like an office job where you're translating written text or spoken word into type.
So basically you're transcribing conversations.
There you go. Yeah. I always think of like kind of like a court reporter, like the person that sits in the court and types everybody says. They were doing that, but in an office setting. So the number of women working outside of the home dramatically increased from what it was before. More women were living independently. So they weren't staying with their parents and then getting married and then moving into their husband's house. They were living on their own sometimes, or living with a female roommate. And women were having fewer children. Why do you think women were having fewer children?
They weren't always living with
Well, they
men.
were working now.
Cause their men were off at war.
Couldn't focus on their men.
Their men were off at war, that's why.
They didn't have time. Why didn't they have time anymore?
Because they were working.
Because they were working. There you go.
Not even at war.
So women were focusing on their own careers. They weren't keeping house, well, they were keeping house, but they didn't want to have to keep up with all these children because they needed to focus on their own careers as well. So think about yourselves and where you are in your life, whether you're working or not working, or before you were working and you were just living under your parents' home. What is the significance of being financially independent?
You can feel like you're proud if you can do that.
You can spend your money how you want.
Yep.
You, dang, I was gonna say that.
You're like, yes, I can do
I
this.
agree with you.
Yeah, so you make your money and you make
You don't
the
have to.
decisions of what you do with it.
You don't have to depend on someone else to live.
Alright, so women, if they had their own job, they would make their own money, and then they could make their own decisions with that money, and they started to recognize that, and they wanted that. Are we good on this slide? Alright, so we have up here in the left, that's Amelia Earhart.
The girl that flew to work.
So she flew planes in the 1920s and the 1930s, which was unheard of. So that's why she's so famous. That's why we probably all recognize her name, is because she was doing something that no one thought that a woman would be able to do at the time. This right here on the right is your stenographer that I was talking about. She would be set up in an office and she would be just copying letters that were handwritten or listening to her boss tell her, write this down, and she would, right? And then there's your 1920s nurse. Alright, so changing social norms. So someone, raise your hand for me and describe what you think a flapper is. Yes.
Weren't they like the kind of like the party girls, baby girls,
Yeah, so we think of like the party girls in the 1920s. What do we think that they wore? Like their attire.
They had like dresses with like the strings coming off that flapped around when they
Really
were
old
dance.
school aprons, maybe?
What?
They showed a lot, bro.
They look good. They were
That looks nice, bro.
weren't they like
They
they
look-
look
There were some bad girls, like slippers.
Right,
Well,
so
it says they began to reject the corset band, so like, it wasn't like, select type.
Tight, right.
Like, they were-
yeah, exactly. So we see this, we get this image in our head, like, you know, like the flapper Halloween costume. That's what I always think of when I hear flapper. With the feather in the hair, like Great Gatsby girls.
Oh.
And that's true, like they did dress that way. That was more like a really nice going out type look. But technically a flapper was any young woman in the 1920s who challenged social traditions with how they were dressed or how they were behaving. So those women are in that picture, but it's a broad spectrum of women at that time. So anybody who was changing their characteristics. So women began to reject the corsets. So women before this always wore corsets to make their middle section smaller. They had that hourglass shape, long dresses, and they were super uncomfortable. These women could hardly breathe. And they were like, we're taking on new jobs, we're doing new things, we want to be comfortable.
So basically, they didn't have to impress any man anymore because they can take care of themselves.
There you go. So yeah, they wanted to dress how they wanted to dress. They didn't want to dress to look like they had no waist anymore or a tiny waist anymore. They wanted to be comfortable, so they started to dress with looser fitting clothes. Instead of that hourglass, it was like a long, straight silhouette. And they chopped their hair off. They got bobbed hairstyles. They wore the transparent hose.
That's supposed to say word. It says more women wear dating.
Yeah, it's supposed to say word.
Alright, correct.
Oh,
Like-
yeah, sorry. So they were dating, smoking, and publicly dancing to jazz music.
Oh, was dancing not like allowed back then?
Dancing in like a shorter dress and like going out parties and no. You were supposed to be at home by a certain time, taking care of your husband. Like, you know, so these women were viewed as like crazy out there, you know, like not a positive thing at the time, but they were finally getting their independence and they didn't care and they were able to experience this newfound sense of exploration and freedom. So here on the right, I have kind of your more, like the true definition of a flapper. So these women are just kind of out socially, smoking. Their skirts are, you know, they don't have on short dresses, but they're shorter than what was happening previously. Alright, so. Divorce was made easier at this time. Divorce was something of like a taboo. You didn't get divorced. You could, people did get divorced, but it was something that you were supposed to be ashamed of. It didn't happen that often. So women got this new sense of freedom, and they are not okay with living under bad husbands anymore. If they weren't happy, they were more inclined to actually go out and attempt to get a divorce, and not really care what people say. But you know, it's important to note that although these dramatic changes were happening, most women were still housewives. They were not as free as men. There was definitely not equality at this time, but they were making a lot of progress. So that's what's important about this era. Yes.
What did the men think of the flappers?
I would think, like, if you were a man, right, and you went out, like, wouldn't you want to, like, be at home with a housewife, but then, like, when you went out, like, you were looking at the flapper girls, right? Because they're crazy and wild and fun, but then socially, traditionally, you would still, for your parents and for your family, you would still want this, like, housewife type, right? I don't know. That's a really good question. What do you guys think? How do you think men portrayed these changes? Or portrayed, like, how men felt about these changes in women?
They were mad.
You think they were mad?
Yeah, because they were like, oh, women are taking all of our stuff now.
Right?
Oh my god.
They probably thought
I think
women
some
didn't
men
deserve it. Like,
Accepted it.
they were like,
They
deluded, I guess.
Yeah.
And then else.
Yes.
I think they view them as not as like
They viewed
they
women
don't
as
like
objects.
respect
They're
them
not
as much
people.
as they would like a housewife or something.
Why?
Yeah, okay, so do you think, like, the flappers would be less respected than a housewife? Like, as this first started changing,
Then I think they would be more like disrespected, but now I think that would be respected because women are more independent now.
so if a man ran into a flapper at a party, but ran into a flapper out in public, you think he would, like, treat her differently?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. What really?
I don't think, clean house
Exactly.
Where, how would you
So if a woman isn't at home all the time cooking and cleaning for you, what do you have to do as a man?
You don't
Gotta
have
work.
to
Have to do all that.
So you gotta help, right? I'm sure men didn't like that either.
Word. Why'd you make that change?
Alright, so that's in our notes. Okay, so we have an assignment, it's not very long, but I'm gonna tell you what the assignment is, and then we're gonna break it to groups and do a little bit of a discussion about what we're gonna write, and then actually do the assignment. Alright, so what you're gonna do is imagine that you're a concerned parent of a young flapper girl. So you are the parent, you're traditional, and your daughter is now a flapper. So you're gonna write a letter to your friend here in 4 to 6 sentences. In your letter, you must include 1 causes of her behavior. So we talked about causes, and in your letter, you're gonna try to tell your friend like what you think caused this, and you have those.
Same.
And then you have to mention 3 effects, which are gonna be your actual changes. So the things that we talked about, click on here I put, you can include new physical appearance, style, occupation, social activities. Alright, so what I want you guys to do for the next 5 to 10 minutes is to break into groups of about 3, maybe 4 if you need to. Talk about at least 1 cause, because you're gonna need 1 cause. And talk about 3 effects. That way when you go to write this, you just have it in your head, boom, write it, and you're done.
1 cause, 3 effects.
Yes.
And we write 1 paper as a group.
No, you're gonna all get with this. So we're gonna discuss, and then come back, straighten our desks, and then write this real quick. It's gonna take you like 10 minutes.
So we're discussing
And we're
then
not
write.
what? Hold on.
Discuss then write. Got it.
Discuss and write. Okay, so you guys break up into groups of 3, turn your desks, talk. I'm gonna come around and see what you guys are talking about. Let's do this desk.
Okay, so I think what we should say is like
Cause 1.
So if I'm a really good letter, can you get a letter?
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't got the right to vote.
Do I have to do another? I already know what I'm gonna write, but I have to do another.
Do what?
I said, I'm gonna write it down, I already know what I'm gonna write, but like, I have to give it a word.
Did you write down all that?
We're able to vote now, but I lost Wilson's and morality.
You guys are
Mother would definitely, like, the question is.
I would say because of also the right, like they just got the right to vote.
Should have been able to vote in the first place.
Yeah, because like, my daughter.
Like they work in the trade, nobody here.
Well, like, yeah, but I mean, like,
Not in my good.
Yeah, yeah.
Also really like.
the data on this one. What are we doing right now?
discussing. 1 cause, 1 effect at least.
Let's say they cut your hair off.
You guys want to do
No.
Cause is gonna be carbon A,
The women got the right to vote.
then decide
They found out they could vote.
They felt like they had more power.
They felt like they could vote.
there's a good.
They became voters.
No, I was
Oh,
kidding.
why are you doing that to me?
Are we ready?
We were, oh, we were,
Need more
There's,
international.
mother would definitely be more sisters. Yeah.
Yeah.
One so right to vote.
So that's gonna be your cause.
I used to have. I think these actually. Pick that up. Because they go.
These messages.
Something like that. So they're like.
no one you take something.
Mother's Day.
3 something.
You ever hear about that?
Good thought. Yeah.
They weren't, I mean, they weren't really more extended, but I'm sure like the parents would be like, these extreme things.
I need to show them a lot thing. I'm gonna get out of Taylor.
They were still young,
They
yeah.
just started like trying to scheme and go to like grab
Alright,
me.
thank you.
Great.
Go to the next one.
One Dr. Water.
They started to get jobs, so they don't need somebody.
Now,
Really?
Yes. swear, like, I've been on
Their new
two
car
And if they always want to.
Or, yeah, so what was it called? Like, what a major event.
A cause?
They're gonna see you get
So their participation.
Yeah.
They see it.
Actually, it's not bad.
Go to that.
Did
They
you see the
say-
attitude he gave you in Harlem?
Yes, so then I keep them
He's a bad dude.
He was in Missouri. What are you talking about?
Think about it getting there
What's
because
the
like,
other one that started?
if you never feel like you're not important,
that
just think
you
about
cannot
how
be
everything
another
is
vote based on
about
your
everything you
So
do.
basically gave women the right.
Really?
So,
Because you're
yes,
that
they was
important.
like the war,
I think we talked
gay
about
women,
like
and
his
stuff,
business.
like,
I was like,
started working.
That was pretty tough.
I think that hurt.
So you would want to be running like,
I'm
as like her mother, but you
Like,
would
matter,
and she'd be like,
it was important because he was
I think that she's going through all these changes because she was
so bad.
Oh, yeah, that's
just
the
being
thing.
poor
He
about
started
it.
doing-
Something like that.
He
Just
told
word
me,
it like
he's
just a letter and then
okay,
start writing, oh, she's doing
I
this,
just
this,
figured
and
you'd
this,
see
and
it
those are
and
gonna
find
be
out, so I wasn't gonna tell you until you saw it.
well,
That didn't take a while ago.
I believe it.
He was on a little bit street. Why are you so worried if he did? He didn't ask you?
Oh, my. I was gonna do
Okay,
it.
so
He said one class.
you're gonna be
Okay, I was gonna take this
okay,
big out of his
you have
mouth.
your daughters a flower, and you're writing to some.
Wait, let me have some.
Just so concerned or mad or whatever. One cause, like why you think that you have
This is one.
Yes.
Oh, Mason Angel thing
He
was.
said,
and then right here.
So how do you feel that you
Don't
can?
put it in
Mark it right there. You're gonna say, I think this is why she's doing this. And then you wanna go and you should start talking about the things that she's actually doing. You can just pick 3 things and say, she's doing this, and this. That way I know,
Maybe want you to
that
read
you know why women started changing and then you want to get right.
So, I just went over to his house yesterday. For the,
Yeah.
this is probably, we said, for stuff that we would like to see. So I was picking up candy, so we go shopping, and here he comes out the front door. And I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you out here? And he's like, can I
In your
not
letter,
talk to you?
there's something about your writing, we do not mention.
What's the,
Like
like,
now.
dog,
And he's like messing with that.
These are like clear mentions like a social cause, and I'd definitely be
And
one
then
to.
he's like,
But
he's like, I want to make sure you're sure you want one. And I
These
was like,
major
Well,
reasons
maybe
here,
persuade,
like,
It was
over
over into my seats and it comes
Oh.
the women and men population started to even out.
I don't care about it, man.
And the 19th Amendment, so these are the major
Yourself
events
for me
that are
and not have
causes,
to
so
zero.
make sure that you mention one of those. Yeah, the things that you saw.
Yeah.
And then go in and talk about the actual things that she's changing, how she's changing.
Yeah,
But according
a
to
whole
some
2
people,
6
not.
week tapes.
Three
that
different
everything on
instructions.
time will go
I'll
to
give
this
you a
class.
thing.
Right, so y'all know.
The 2 rows
Yeah,
closest.
mine seemed like the reason why she started that was because like they started getting more rights to vote,
Yeah.
started getting more freedom, jobs, and some effects would be she's changing different, acting different,
Yeah.
acting a lot different, and
Join this.
becoming independent.
What?
Perfect, you good? Okay. Alright guys, go ahead and move back, and I'll give you your assignment.
With the
Alright, move your desk please.
We were in the bar together. Right there.
Wow,
We literally look like the same
I
person.
can't move my foot.
It's awesome.
Is that what
She's
you-
really
I'm
sweet.
really trying hard.
You should go into
Did Michael do yours?
Your friend. We have to write about when we talked about him.
the ball. And his one after head too. And then his answer.
That's the limit. The first move, it's like
Yeah.
over
You
the
guys
top
are
of the
looking
top,
there,
like-
that's just different.
He did her belly button too.
If you wanna make up your daughter's name, that's If you wanna be super creative, it'll make it more fun when I read them later, but that's up to you.
They all stood up.
My daughter thinks Amber.
Look at them both. Dude, I know they're
Why are
both
you,
the same day.
why are you beating her bad news?
We left in like 5 minutes.
Huh? Yeah, you
She's
Alright guys, you have
All day.
You guys have about 12 minutes. It's only been taking everybody else about 10, so you should be good.
What? We can just, if you want.
Oh.
Where's my blue one? I'll be right on. I'm mixing those.
You guys can turn that in on the top row thing of the tray.
We have water in your bag. Ladies restroom, you drink water. Ladies restroom, you drink water. Or not? Even when I can work, people say no. I don't believe
What
it.
Cody, do that.
Safe for you.
She got a job.
Can't get more around. What do you want us to do with this? People?
Yeah, keep those for notes, because you may have like a question or two pop up on your next test, so just keep
Did you
those.
just make a memory for this? What is? Hey girl, you girl.
And another one, pretty good.
It's
There's some good quotes, so keep your picture on the page.
Oh, got a picture on the page?
That's what surveys mean, you have a,
No.
where's Amber? There you are. Don't tell me what you're doing. Let us fill it out, and you get your picture on the page. You want to turn one in?
Hey, picture on paper?
Thank you. How do y'all make it? I don't understand. I didn't
Because
know.
the letter from you.
I was ready for it to go. I ran. Oh, yes. Alright, cool. I was so cold. I did everything.
Real fair.
These are so boring. It'll be easy.
Really?
I wish you would text Grace again. She did, they put it in.
I'm at 85.
Guys, make sure your fractions have been freshened, please.
You're already up, Kevin.
Well, you're still going.
What?
Oh, you tie knots.
Yeah.
Did they give you the grade for the last,
Miss Bailey's the water.
What's cracking this week?
you cut your hair.
So what's
The
cracking?
most memorable part. I put doing it.
What?
What'd you say?
What's happening?
Most memorable part was getting freaking
Fourth again.
looking at, yeah.
I'll find.
No, you keep that, just for you guys. Keep it some-
You're gonna call it double.
Huh?
You're gonna call me.
Bro, you should've gone to that one that, wait, did I ever send you the tag and stuff? You should've gone to that one, it was nice.
I went to, when you turn your diesel guys and things like that.
Well, I went to Britain. I don't know.
Why are you such
You know Brian and Merle have to pass away from Hershey before they do this party.
Oh, Can I have another one?
Okay, I'm gonna give you like the last opportunity for DD. Okay, somebody told me something they learned today that was something they didn't know or was like crazy.
Flippers.
Flappers.
Flappers, not
Learned about
flappers.
Oh, I put flippers on my paper too. Remember
Yes.
Jason back then?
Oh no, this dude's graffiti thing.
Oh, stenography.
Stenography,
We learned what
that's-
stenography was.
I wrote it weird.
Oh, all three colleges. Like, I didn't know that there was like that many, like, I just thought it was like, okay, that's the day after how much it was.
Yes.
I didn't realize that women didn't have so little job opportunities before.
Yeah, so the job fields for women were really, it was really small. Yes. There you go. So women had it covered, men's job, women's role were one.
I didn't know women were pushing.
You know, women were forced. Yep.
I knew that women were forced drives every month.
Only when they went to
Who are you on, Darcy?
Wait,
Don't have him.
You right when you married?
Well, lots of dresses already have them in there. Like, when they like, when you have to like.
I mean, no go is a go, I mean, maybe it doesn't.
Y'all good? Anything else you learned today?
We read that.
But I learned, oh,
I learned that.
Loose clothes.
Loose clothing.
they started going up to party.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Alright.
Are you very warm?
Alright guys, you have a good Thanksgiving. I won't see you guys till after Thanksgiving.
everything, but then I did it.
Yeah, you didn't even worry about how you was all out, but I always do five.
I tried to wear a flap or
Time is fluid.
what about these restrooms? That's it? Nine?
Everyone perceives time.
Come on, Ian.
Come on.